With the current Cost of Living Act, you might be wondering what's the best way to carry out a rent increase for your property. So at the moment, the Act has that you can increase a private residential tenancy rent by 3%, and that's once every 12 months. So you do, when you're putting a rent increase notice in place, have to state when the last increase happens, and if it was over 12 months by the time the next one comes into effect, then that's fine. They've also introduced where a landlord has evidence that their costs have increased, that you can apply to the rent officer for an increase of up to 6%. Now, there is criteria that you do have to meet in order to be able to have that carried out. So firstly, the type of cost, there are certain categories that has to be. Firstly, it has to be related to the let property, so not your overall landlord costs, but costs specific to that rental property. So that can be things like your mortgage interest, insurance premiums, and any service costs that are included in the rent as part of the tenancy agreement. So the easiest way to work out if it's worth it for you to go down that route or go to the standard, which is capped at 3% at the moment, is to firstly work out the different amounts. So the maximum that the rent officer can increase the rent by is 6%, or 50% of your increase in cost. So whichever is the lower amount is what they would award. So first of all, you would work out what's 6% of the monthly rent and have that figure noted down. Then look at your costs. What is 50% of the cost that you've had increased, and write that down. Whichever is the lower amount is the amount that your rent would increase by. So then you can look to see, is it worth me doing this, or should I go for the 3%? As an example, your monthly rent is £1,000. 6% increase would be £60. For example, your costs have increased by £250. 50% of that is £125. So if you have the evidence to prove that with the rent officer, there shouldn't be a problem of your rent being increased by the £60, which is the lower of the two amounts. On the Scottish Government website, there's lots of really detailed information on the type of evidence that's required with this as well. It is a set form that needs to be completed. They have created a specific application form that you have to fill out. We can do that on your behalf, provided that you send us the information that's required. So you would put in your existing costs, and then you would put in your new cost and the date that takes effect. What's really important is that the date that the cost takes effect is within 6 months prior to you submitting the application. That's the only cost that will be considered by the rent officer. So if your costs increase more than 6 months or haven't yet increased, you wouldn't be able to do the application at that time. Then what happens is you have to notify your tenants using another set form that you're putting this application in, and you have to put in the reasoning that you're putting that application. So that would be the same, the increase in your costs. That's detailed to the tenants, and then you would submit your application to the rent officer. When the response comes through, the 3-month rent increase notice would apply from the date that you originally notified the tenants. Now, depending on when the rent officer makes the decision, there may be a 2-week notice period required, given if they give you it towards the end of the 3-month period that the tenants are required. So if you're not sure, obviously you can get in touch and ask us any questions, but the main thing to do is work out the 50% of the increase in your costs, work out the 6% of the existing rent, what that rent increase figure would be, which is the lower amount. Is that worth doing this application, or should I put a 3% application as normal rent increase notice to the tenants? Also, it is really important because the evidence is quite strict. It needs to be in your name, it needs to have the let property detailed within it as well, and it needs to have the date and the confirmed amount and the changes all detailed within that. If you don't have that, you would need to request that from the likes of your mortgage provider, your insurance provider, your factor company, things like that. Thank you.